Now let us imagine a population that is variable. This is something we see in many species, that there is variability, and let us imagine that this is one such population. Next slide, please. Now let us imagine that a part of the population is isolated. Another part of the population is isolated somewhere else. And then we have two smaller populations in isolations. Now, the important thing to note is that the isolated fragment does not have the full variability of the population. It is only a part of it. There are some variants that are missing in this isolated fragment. For example, we don't have any white individuals in this particular one. In this isolated fragment, we don't have any magenta ones. The isolated population is genetically poorer than the whole population. Now, a small population has a tendency to have inbreeding. That is, related individuals will interbreed. Also, isolated populations will have a time when they are very small indeed. In various generations they'll be bigger and smaller, but it is the time when they are smallest that is most important from the point of view of genetic variability. At the time when the population is smallest, there is a greatest reduction of the variability that originally existed in the population. And in these two isolated populations, we can see that they are different. They are increasingly different by the very fact that they are isolated and that they are small populations. Next slide, please. At some stage, the small population may grow into a bigger one because the conditions improve. And then you'll see that these two isolated populations look quite different just by the very fact that they have been isolated. This is referred to as genetic drift. And we know that genetic drift operates in nature, and it results in having populations that are different. Darwin observed on the Galapagos Islands that the finches on different islands have different beaks. This was one of the main observations that led him to propose his theory of evolution. Now, the reason why the finches have different beaks on the different islands is because they are isolated. These finches, they do not fly from one island to the other. This is too far for them. And as a result, they develop differences. By genetic drift, how did the birds arrive in the islands? Possibly some major storm brought a few individuals onto an island, and then these individuals multiplied, and we have a population which has a specific type of beak. Then this is how we can explain the variation of the beaks in the finches on the different islands. We don't need any theory of evolution. This can be explained entirely by genetic drift. Now let us go back to our two isolated populations. These populations can also be subjected to natural selection. If they are growing in different conditions, there may be different factors that are selecting against some variants in the population. So, for example, if this population is subjected to selection against the red individuals, we will get a picture something like this. And here we have selection against the blue individuals, and we end up with something like this. So natural selection is leading to an increased differentiation of these two populations. In school textbooks, we often find this example of the peppered moths. These are insects which are said to be sitting on the bark of birch trees. And when the bark is whitish, these individuals are less visible to the birds that prey on them, and so they survive. But when the birches were covered with soot in the industrial regions, the population of the moths was found to be black. In other words, there was natural selection against the white ones on black bark and against the black ones on white bark. And this has led to differences in the populations. Of course, the moths were not isolated all that much from each other, but it was observed, it is said to have been observed, that the populations in the industrial regions are more black. And this is shown as an example of evolution in process. Actually, the birds prey on the insect in flight rather than on the bark itself. But anyway, this is the example that is given, and it can be very well explained in terms of natural selection, as shown before. Next slide, please. Now, a time may come when the isolated populations will combine, that the ranges of them will meet. So for some reasons, the populations will interact, and then we'll get a reconstitution of a very variable population, because these two isolated populations have met. It is also sometimes claimed that the joining of some populations, giving a richer gene pool, is an example of evolutionary process.